Escape from Tomorrow is a 2013 surrealist horror movie filmed on location at Disney World, Florida and Disneyland, California, without the permission of either theme park. It tells the story of a troubled father made redundant just as he begins his family vacation at Disney World, and what ensues are creepy hallucinations and perverse sexually repressed fantasies as he attempts to tolerate the frustrations of being an emotionally distant father and husband amidst the bad vibes of the self-proclaimed most magical place on Earth. At least, that's kind of what's going on. The film isn't especially clear in its intent, partly by design, instead meandering around being a David Lynch, Terrence Malick-esque mood piece, and an ambiguous character study on happiness and disillusionment. If you're not one for weird, absurdist arthouse films where the concept of horror is so aggressively in the eye of the beholder than something that's forthright, Escape from Tomorrow is definitely not for you. Whereas for me, I have many conflicted feelings on the whole ordeal that make it a strangely fascinating watch. For context, the film's defining talking point following its premiere at Sundance in 2013 was the fact it was shot guerrilla style without Disney or the park's consent, with the crew being made to blend in as tourists using DSLRs to subtly film the actors as they performed around actual staff and visitors with mics hidden on their person. While it was audacious and made for an interesting style of direction, adding an inadvertent naturalism to real people confusingly watch this pushy father have a meltdown, in reality, almost no drama unfolded except on the last day, when security pulled the actors aside to question why they kept going in and out of the park in short succession, even asking if they were famous because they noticed the crew filming them from a distance. They ended up green screening parts of it in order to achieve certain angles in post-production, with first-time writer-director Randy Moore editing the film secretly in South Korea in case Disney came knocking, which, to be honest, was an over-precaution seeing as nobody knew they were even making the film. Concerns were raised about the legalities of commercially filming on private property without a permit and the lack of consent granted from the general public shown in the film, but of course the big question on everyone's mind was how Disney would react to copyright infringement. Efforts were made to remove most of the intellectual property, music and films, and the word Disney is only said once in the film and is deliberately bleeped on screen as part of a meta tongue-in-cheek nod to the infringement, but while the on-screen park is treated as largely generic and indistinguishable, you can still single out trademark attractions. However, given the broadness of copyright law, many have defended the film on the grounds of fair use, because technically it could be viewed as parody or commentary, with legal academic Tim Wu writing in The New Yorker that it's also transformative because it turns a family attraction into a horror movie. Following Sundance, it seemed everybody was anticipating Disney to outright ban the film, with some even expecting a legal battle where this humble underdog indie flick would be martyrized up against the tyrannical corporate giants of Disney. But in deflating all this build-up, Disney's response was to perfectly checkmate the publicity by simply never acknowledging it. That's honestly why you don't hear much about this notorious guerrilla film that gives a middle finger to Disney 10 years since its release. Because Disney did not care, they did not take the bait, they let the film exist and fall into obscurity by way of its own merits, or rather, lack thereof. Ultimately, Escape from Tomorrow just isn't as provocative or as ambitious as it's hyped up to be. Its lack of narrative focus towards the domineering shadowy forces of Disney gave the corporation little reason to react, since the film wasn't really this presumed scathing critique of their image, at least depending on how you interpret what's shown. Instead, it's an admirably personal and intimate film that focuses on one individual man's complicated relationship with Disney World, and more so with himself, rather than Disney as a collective, all-encompassing institution. Regardless, it is a wild and uncomfortable ride. I wouldn't call it scary, but it certainly left me feeling icky inside. So as we go along, please leave your thoughts and feelings in the comments below, including a recommendation for what I should cover next. And lastly, here are a few words from this video's sponsor, Raycon. When I think of July, I think of Ryan time, because summer is when I spend the most time focusing on self-care and decompressing from the last 6 months of intensive video making. From overindulging in video games, to zoning out on the sofa listening to the new Queens of the Stone Age album, to getting outdoors for fresh air while listening to stories from the No Sleep podcast, all these relaxing activities are achieved with the power of Raycon. Disrupting the electronics industry with quality-sounding wireless earbuds starting at half the price of other premium audio brands, Raycon earbuds allow me to switch between 3 customizable sound profiles, bass, balanced and pure sound, to fit the vibe of what I'm listening to, in addition to toggling noise isolation and awareness mode for when I need to talk to someone or listen to my surroundings or just drown it all out completely. Raycon earbuds give you 8 hours of playtime, 32 hours of battery life, seamless Bluetooth pairing, a compact design for that smooth, comfortable, perfect in-ear fit, and with a variety of colors and patterns to fit your aesthetic, summer has only gotten sexier. There's no better time to test drive Raycon earbuds for yourself by clicking the link in the description box below or going to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. So, in my first class in uni, I was told that black and white filmmaking had one of 2 purposes. One is a strong artistic intent, like a period-specific look or flashback or narrative implication, and the other was for masking bad cinematography, and in the case of Escape from Tomorrow, it's both. According to Mur, the choice to go black and white was mainly logistical due to the scrappy, uncontrollable conditions of production, but at the same time, it works well to achieve this constant sensation of an abnormally bad dream. There is a nauseating discomfort and whimsy to it, like watching a weird parody movie within a movie, akin to an episode of Black Mirror or more acutely The Twilight Zone, given the 60s contemporary sci-fi aesthetic of the Epcot section of the park, in addition to the jarring use of close-ups and the claustrophobic reaction shots. This is further compounded with the use of a classical Disney-esque score and the eventual obvious green screening that makes the whole thing feel unreal, artificial and fairy tale-like, much like the concept of the theme park itself. At times, it's got this mix between avant-garde and observant slice-of-life cinema verite, but as things become increasingly unusual, we start to see portions of it framed like a classical Hollywood film, for reasons I'll share at the end of the video. Once you remove the uncanny visual style, it's largely a monotone, realistic look at a family holiday where all the joy and wonder is evaporated by the unpleasant disposition of our main protagonist, Jim White. What instigates Jim's emotional deterioration is when the film opens with him overlooking his hotel balcony towards the world of Disney where dreams come true, as it's starkly juxtaposed against the reality of him being made redundant by his employer. We then get a sense that his relationship with his wife Emily has turned sour and resentful, as Jim spends his time distantly ruminating over the future of his finances, his family stability, and the hit to his masculine pride over what to tell his wife, or rather, that's what I assumed from the camera work and fast cut editing alluding to his fear and anxiety, when in actuality, his fantasies reveal an uglier character deep within. You see, initially I just naturally expected Jim to be traditionally set up as this caring, loving, yet troubled father fallen on hard times, while in the trademark happiest magical place on earth, and much of the film would be him and his wife putting on a brave face to hide the strain of their marriage so that their children could foster idyllic, fond family memories to last them a lifetime, but that's not at all what the film is going for. It subverts the classical trope of the tragic protagonist by revealing that Jim doesn't appreciate his family and shows them little care or attention, specifically dragging his kids on his own selfish, sleazy adventure to stalk these 2 girls he coincidentally keeps bumping into. It comes out of nowhere, as if to suggest he's been put under a spell to hypnotically gaze at these girls whenever they appear, like some perverted Disney fairy tale, soon imagining himself frolicking around with them before being brought back to reality by his understandably frustrated family. Jim's unsubtle male gaze reinforces the voyeuristic feel of the camera work, which early on insinuates that someone or something is watching the family. There is this one guy on a motorized wheelchair with a neck brace and bratty son who hurts the daughter, who seems to have a leering eye on the family and Jim in particular, but it ends up up being a red herring when he just stopped showing up later on. My assumption with this is that Jim's discomfort towards the man is an unaware reflection of his own behavior towards the girls, which, as I said, is grossly unsubtle to the point that even his young son calls him out on it. The evident theme is that he suffers from sexual repression that's intensified by his lack of spark with his wife, his fixation on the girls, and his eventual encounter with a stranger wearing an alluring magical medallion as he tries his best to divert his eyes back to her cleavage. My theory by this point was that the park is feeding off and catering to his dreams and desires. If we're viewing the world through his eyes, it's oppressive at first, until it becomes romanticized when he's briefly visually revised as someone from a classical Hollywood fantasy where he indulges in shameful lust, leading him to pay the stranger, who is revealed to be a married mother by the way, for intercourse while his own child waits outside the room. She tells him that the princesses of the park are part of a secret sex worker ring, implying the park really is about catering to every dream and desire. But noticeably, Jim is left unfulfilled by his encounter, calling into question if it's what he truly wants, slowly breaking the spell the park seems to put him under. The proverbial magic of the park just doesn't work for him. He can't fill the void inside of him, slowly progressing towards alcoholism to force the illusion of himself having fun, when in reality he's sinking deeper and deeper into a suffocating depressive nightmare he can't awaken from. The thing is, with how surreal and vague the entire film is, I could be misinterpreting the entire story, but there is a notably cynical feel to how it portrays a parent's perception of Disney World as this never-ending, inescapable purgatory. I would almost describe the film as the equivalent to being stuck in a queue waiting to get on a ride while delirious from the heat, hallucinating hell on earth just to achieve an extremely brief bit of excitement only for it to immediately fade away again. Genuinely, the first half of the film is Jim suffering through the theme park wishing to be anywhere else but there. The problem is, however, when Jim's true self is revealed, it's hard to keep feeling sympathetic for his depression and disillusionment when there's no tangible complexity behind his life or marriage. There is potent relatability to the premise of unhappy parents taking their innocent, naive children oblivious to their struggles on a picturesque illusion of happily ever afters, and then slowly unraveling the cracks behind closed doors. Yet Emily is written to be nothing more than a one-dimensional nagging wife, as if to make Jim's behaviour seem justified because he's the victim in this oppressive, loveless marriage, so to speak. That said, given the film is arguably framed from Jim's subjective point of view, since we see his unique fantasies and hallucinations, he's obviously only going to see what he wants to see. Granted, it's later contradicted when we see Emily also begin hallucinating and wanting to leave the park, leading to a heated argument with Jim that results in their daughter Sarah getting caught in the crossfire of Emily's anger, in which she strikes Sarah. On paper, it seems this is the moment where the parents' strain bleeds onto the children, shattering their happy, magical holiday and realizing the true reality of their family. But I just spent all this time talking about Jim's frustrations, delusions, absenteeism, and complete dislike and disregard for his family, and with all that bubbling up, it's the wife that hits the daughter? If that's supposed to be the dramatic crescendo, it contextually makes more sense that Jim is the one to lash out, especially seeing as what follows is the mother and son going back to the hotel room, while Jim tries to cheer up Sarah by going on another ride where the same perverted eroticism continues. After which, Sarah goes missing while Jim fights his urges and rejects a girl's advances only to be spit in the face and then detained by security, thus commencing his big final heroic redemption arc. Now, if we instead saw Jim lash out and see his family separate from him completely, this final act would make much more sense because all the same events would still happen, but at least there would be a moment for Jim to reflect in self-pity and come to terms with his behaviour more directly. Instead, we get a rather unearned climax that left me feeling very conflicted, so brace yourself for spoilers for the ending to this bizarre nightmare. So, throughout the film, there are some loose fragments that insinuate there's a grand Illuminati-style conspiracy going on in the park, unbeknownst to the public who are under the influence of Disney's spell, but none of it is ever fully addressed and open to interpretation. After being tasered much to his liking, Jim awakens in East Simon's lab, which for context are a mega German technological and engineering corporation who for 12 years between 2005 and 2017 sponsored Disney's Epcot attraction, or experimental prototype community of tomorrow, which itself was a park within Disney World inspired by Disney's theoretical pitch for a futuristic utopia, or something of that nature. The point is, indicative of the film's title both literally and metaphorically, the story continually alludes to Disney World being this grand illusion where people are lulled into following an escapist haven when in fact we're thoughtless drones attracted to something that isn't real. The unsubtle irony is that this proposed utopia of happy memories is actually a dystopia, because it only temporarily numbs us to the pain of existence before we go right back to our old boring, stressful lives, hence Jim's disillusionment and constant unfulfillment with his experience. Basically, from my interpretation, it seems to reveal that Simons was brought in by Disney to experiment on and exploit human dreams and imagination so that the cycle of Disney's control over the people is repeated from one generation to the next. This overarching evil enchantment by Disney is then reinforced after Jim escapes using his foot cream to a cream on the control panel, and he wanders through a fireworks display at the end of the night where the public mindlessly and hypnotically gaze at the sky as if under a spell. While looking for Sarah, Jim discovers that the stranger he had intercourse with has taken her, soon revealing herself to be a witch who lost her job as a park princess after hugging a child to death, which ends with Jim doing a literal reenactment of Sleeping Beauty, where he saves his daughter, breaks the witch's curse, and happily ever after returns to the family's hotel room with Sarah, where Jim has a tender moment realizing the value of his family. However, Jim then dies of cat flu. Oh shit, you want me to explain that? So, logic aside, obviously, earlier in the film when Jim rejected one of the girl's advances and she spat on him, she passed on the flu, almost as a punishment for him not following his urges and breaking away from the park's control to save his daughter. The ending reveals the two girls are actually fairies working for the park, thus somewhat validating the interpretation that Jim was under a spell to follow them from the very start and indulge in his fantasies to feed further and further into Disney World's illusion. But since he broke away from it, he knows too much and thus must be disposed of. However, given how vague and contrived its storytelling can be, there is also the interpretation that the fairies are evil, since Emily briefly sees their true face, and the scientist rebukes Jim for not taking his son on the Buzz Lightyear ride to create a key illusory happy memory because he wanted to follow the girls, which one of the cleaners ends up implanting in his son anyway, defeating the purpose of the ride if it's really all that easy to mind control the people. The fairies being evil also links with the sudden vision Jim has of the park's destruction if he chose to go with the girl, thus there's a conflict between the fairy tale and sci-fi fantasies of the park. Once he dies after his son ignores his pleas for help, in come mysterious cleaners, Men in Black style, to neuralize the family and remove Jim's body, with the Disney World spell being seemingly passed on to his son. Now, remember earlier in the video when I mentioned that the film's style becomes increasingly more classical Hollywood with the use of music and green screen cinematography? Well, the idea that Disney World hypnotizes its guests with this false idealistic utopia is mirrored in how the film moves away from a gritty modern look to a campy 60s artificial melodrama, with the final reveal being a new family arriving at the hotel to replace Jim's family, and the way they're costumed and appear looks like your stereotypical attractive 60s Hollywood picturesque family. As a result, the lack of answers and all the weird paranoid ambiguity makes it feel like a cold opening to this ideal Disney family story, much like how the cold opening for Jim's family is a random decapitation on a roller coaster that appears to have been covered up by Disney to maintain their prosperous utopia. Jim essentially becomes that random guy you see in movies who tries to warn the protagonists about all the bad things happening and nothing being what it seems, before being unexpectedly axed off under mysterious circumstances. As I said early in the video, the movie subverts making Jim the traditional fatherly Hollywood hero. He's the creepy, eccentric guy that people should have listened to. Randy Moore has said that the thesis of the film is to explore his complicated relationship with his father, and how he was raised on Disney World and the strange fusion of happiness and sadness that came with it, which Moore has now passed on through his family. If it's to say Jim represents his father, then the problem isn't so much Disney World itself, but rather what it's come to represent to Moore personally, a happy place poisoned by unresolved issues, and perhaps one day Moore hopes his own family can break that troubled cycle so that the real magic can return.